Welcome to Skin Goals, everyone, your go-to podcast for all things skincare. I'm your host, Lisa Avalos, and joining me is my beautiful co-host, Kelly.
Oh, thanks for that, Lisa. Hey, everyone, and welcome into another episode. Today, we are talking all about sun. And I don't know if where you're at, if it has started to get a little warmer weather out. Yesterday, it was like the first 70-degree day here, and I was so grateful for that big ball in the sky, that sun to be warming my body for the first time in forever. But I'm so curious about the sun. I know being in the industry, there's so much that we need to be careful around the sun. So I want to get into it today with Dr. Brian Bodner, our principal scientist, who's here with us today to really take us into all things sun, UV, and ultimately sunscreen as well. Brian, welcome to the episode.
Thank you. And it's great to be here again, Kelly and Lisa. Always a pleasure.
And we're so excited about shedding the light on sun. Brian, can you tell us your expertise at L'Oreal? You talked with us before about hydration and antioxidants, but sun's a special topic for you. Tell us about your history with sun and sunscreen.
Sure. I mean, I spent 12 years now in the industry, and some of that was in makeup, but the other more than half of it has been in sun protection. And so always a very particularly important topic for me. I think there's so much cool science behind it and a lot of information to share. So I'm always excited to share about the science because it's definitely a passion that I have to try to explain some of these, what could be complicated topics. They're usually easily explainable in simple terms. And so I'm happy to be here again, especially to talk about this topic, which is really cool.
Awesome. So we are going to break up this topic in a couple episodes, everyone, because there's so much to learn. But first, let's start from the beginning. There's this big fire gas ball in the sky that I personally love. I live in Chicago and I only get about 3 months of sun. So when it's out, I want to bathe in it pretty much. But what does that big ball of fire in the sky do to the earth, Brian? Let's start from the beginning. Like we're in 8th grade and we're in science class. Sure. I want to know all about the sun and even a rainbow, because that's probably part of that whole ray system in the sky.
Well, yeah. I mean, the sun gives us life, right? Like the sun is, without it, we wouldn't be here, right? We wouldn't be here. It would be very, very different. And it's good to note before we understand what the sun does to our skin, we have to kind of understand like what's coming at us. What is this? Like, we call it sunlight, but sunlight is not just one thing. And in fact, you mentioned rainbows, right? We know even from rainbows, the stuff we see, we can break up visible light into its individual colors. We see white light, but really that's just all the color. So yeah, sunlight is more than one thing. And if we're talking about sunlight and its effects on skin, which is shedding the light on what we're doing today, we have to talk about what sunlight is made of.
Amazing. So tell me about the different types of light and their potential damage to the skin.
Sure. Well, I mean, first we have to talk about the different types of light. And like I said, it's not just red, yellow, orange, blue. It's not Roy G. Biv here. It's beyond the stuff that you see. That's just the stuff you see, right? That's just visible light. And you might have talked about energy in terms of in high school, like electromagnetic energy and how like radio waves and sunlight and other things, these are all part of the same thing. They're all part of the spectrum of what's called electromagnetic radiation. And visible light is a little part of that. And the sun puts out a lot more than just visible light. So it's not just the stuff you see, that's visible light, but it's also the stuff you feel. So when we talk about the sunlight, it kind of has to go through the atmosphere, it has to go through space, it has to go through a bunch of stuff, but eventually it reaches us. So what reaches us here on the Earth is a total amount of energy that the sun's putting out, that's sunlight. About 40% of that energy, that's visible light, that's stuff we see. 50% of it is stuff we feel as heat. Right? It gets hot in the sun, right? This makes sense. And we can term that energy infrared energy. That's heat energy. So it's, again, part of this electromagnetic spectrum. but it's a little lower in energy, and we don't see it. We feel it. We feel it as heat. That's 50%. 40% is visible, so that leaves 10%. What's that extra 10%? That's where the UV light comes into play, which again, you might have heard, UV light. This is UVA and
So what you're
UVB.
telling
These are
me,
mixtures of
Brian,
UV.
that's wild because 10% is the part that not that we should be worried about, but that's what we're protecting ourselves. Out of all 100%, 10% is that UVA, UVB light.
Right. And as like we talk about that, we hear that, you probably have, if you've seen sunscreens in the market and stuff,
Yeah.
you might have heard UV protection. You wear sunglasses and it says, UV protection on them, right? Yes. Although it should be understood that, all of that sunlight hits our skin. And so all of it could potentially have an impact on our skin. And in fact, some of it does. UV just happens to be the most energetic. So the most energy behind it. And that's why we often focus on UV. You got it. Yeah, it's dancing around there. So if you're going to look at one of the types of light, you might as well look at UV light as the strongest thing there. But don't ignore the other stuff too. That's the kind of the point here. I think too often when we think of sunlight, we either talk about the UV piece or we talk about, sunlight's visible light, but sunlight's all of those. It's visible light, UV light, and infrared. And so if we're thinking about sunscreens that protect from damage that could be caused by sunlight, we need to think of it as not just one thing. It's not just sunlight. It's not just UV. It's not just infrared. It's not just visible. It's all of those things and their potential effects on the skin.
Brian, random question, like on that
random
spectrum.
Is the name of the game.
I understand. Right. Random. I understand for UV, there's UVC. Does it go all the way to like UVZ or?
I know, does it? No, and it does go to UVA, UVB, and UVC. Okay. You never hear about UVC, and there's a good reason why, because our atmosphere is really awesome at protecting against UVC. It's actually so energetic that it starts breaking bonds in some of the chemicals in the air. So yeah, the sun puts out UVC, but we have the ozone layer, right? You hear about the ozone layer?
Yes.
Ozone absorbs UVC. So UVC light hits the ozone, it breaks it into pieces, and thank you, ozone, because now you've protected us from UVC. But you still have UVB and UVA getting through. So when we take that little 10% sliver, right? And it's almost all of it is UVA. So 90% of that 10% is UVA, 10% of that 10% is UVB. So if we go back to the whole 100% of sunlight, let's just say, what hits us is 50% infrared, that's heat, 40% visible, that's what we see. And then 10%, the remaining 10%, 9% of that is this invisible UVA light. And then only 1% is this UVB light. Right? So it sounds like we shouldn't care about UVB, but the problem is that the energy goes exactly in the opposite direction. So the most energetic is the least sort of prevalent thing that's in there. And so when we're thinking of sunlight, the way I like to think of it is it's kind of like an army coming at you, where you might have an army of like soldiers, right? So like the foot soldiers and all those little like maybe things that don't really do much damage on their own. This is like the visible, the infrared, and even maybe some of the UVA is the foot soldiers. So they can do some damage, but you need to actually, have a decent amount of them. And UVB are these like the tanks, the big, like the siege towers, if you're in medieval times, right? These are the things where it's like, if that reaches your castle wall, you're in trouble. So you have to be concerned about them, but you can't ignore the rest of the army. So you should mount your defense to be able to block against a whole lot of this individually not so scary things and a few of really scary things on their own. That's the UVB, and UVA and the other parts are a little less scary, a little bit.
I'm literally like setting up soldiers like right now in my mind, like at my desk, and they are like trying to like climb through the walls, and there's the big cannons, and okay, so that's the UVB is like the big, powerful, energetic thing that could destroy.
Big, powerful things, exactly. And sometimes you want to think of it like, if you want to think of it like, I need to block myself from an army that's attacking me, that's maybe the way to think about it, is the army is not just one thing. Okay. So that's why we talk about broad spectrum protection. This is where all these sorts of things on why we have to be concerned about UVA and UVB and their effects, and sometimes visible light, and even in some ways infrared light. It's sunlight in general and its effects on the skin.
Well, that's a great point in our show to take a quick break. And we're back from our break.
Hey, so we were just talking about the spectrum of light. And one of the things I am hearing about all the time, which I think is in the spectrum of light, is blue light, especially with like
blue light is light. I can guarantee.
It's within the rainbow part of the spectrum. Sure. Where indigo is, I don't know. Could you tell us a little bit about the blue light? Like, and does it, like, how might it affect our skin?
Sure. And like I kind of hinted at before, right? All like sunlight is all the light, right? It's visible, it's infrared, it's UVA, UVB, right? We talked about all that and how it's varied just a moment ago. Blue light is a piece of the visible light spectrum. And if you're looking at visible light, the reason why it looks different and it's able to be separated is because it is different energies. So you have on one side, you have the lower energy visible light. That's like the reds, the yellows, and the oranges. And on the other side of the rainbow, you have the high energy. So blue, indigo, violet, right? Like this is blue light in general. And that's why we talk about that more. You hear more about it because it is the high energy visible. And sometimes it's called that, HEV or high energy visible. It's the same thing as blue light. So the question is, though, should we be more concerned about that one? I mean, it is more higher energy. So in this model of looking at an army of different, like, how scary is this soldier? Yeah, blue light's a little more scary, but you can't ignore the rest of it. And it seems a little unfair in many situations to just single out, oh, it's blue light alone.
It's not just the Biv of Roy G. Biv.
It's not just the Biv. It's not just the Biv of Roy G. Biv. And more importantly, and keep this in mind too, because you usually hear blue light in reference to like screens, right? Like, Don't careful about your computer screens. This literally the screen here. If you're on the phone, your phone screens. I can pretty confidently say, don't worry, because in comparison with the amount of light that you get from the sun, your screen is putting out way less. Okay, the sun is putting out a whole lot more energy to give yourself blue, to show you blue. Your screen is specifically made to put out blue wavelength light, especially nowadays. It's very much efficient. And so it's just putting out a lot of visible, not a whole lot of other energy. And so you don't actually need a whole lot in order to see blue. So the overall amount of energy is just way less. So if you're talking about blue light of a screen, talk about blue light from the sun. And at that point, you might as well be concerned about the whole sunlight thing that we just described.
Right. Are you sure? Because I happen to be a big scroller and spend a lot of time. I might be a good test subject.
I'm going to say, and I'd be willing to say probably true that if you're scrolling on your phone a lot, don't be so concerned about what effect it's having on your skin. Be more concerned about the effect it's having on your thumbs. Scrolling.
My back honestly. And my arm are definitely feeling
right?
that. Yeah.
Laying in your bed or whatever, scrolling before you go to sleep. And it's like the weird way you do it. Be worried about that, actually, more so than the effect that blue light is having on your skin. Now, the sun, it's a different story. And that's where it kind of comes into play here.
That's where I have questions on that, Brian, because we've talked about blue light and we talked about UVA and UVB. But what is UVA do to the skin, and what does UVB do to the skin?
Sure. And they're different. Like, so they're different soldiers, right? Again, in the sunlight, this different types of damage can be caused by the different types of light. Now they all are hitting your skin. We're not usually in front of a specific filter. That filters out any particular one. So let's just say you go out in the sun now. The higher energy light, it's kind of funny. It damages more, but it also travels a different depth in your skin. So as energy gets higher, it travels shorter distance through your skin, but it does more damage. And kind of the opposite is also true. So the visible light and infrared, that travels way deep in your skin, but it does less damage overall because it's less energetic. And you've kind of seen this if you shine, well, you can't really see this, but when you shine a light through your skin, like flashlight or whatever, you can see a little bit, right? Because it does actually pass through your skin. If you did that same thing, please don't, with UVB light, it wouldn't pass through your cheek, right? It does not pass through. Please don't, if you have access to UVB, don't try to shine it through your skin in your cheek, because you'll do damage. But this kind of hints at the point that they can cause different damage on your skin. The skin will react to them differently, and you can have different photo damage done to your skin by the different forms of light.
So what would that, because in our world, we hear UVB burn and UVA age. Can you explain that theory that we all hear in the industry?
It's well, you can actually kind of translate that. It's not directly understood this way, so this is not really the way to look at it from a scientific point of view. But I like using that term because it's easy to remember. UVB burn, UVA age. It makes sense if you're considering how deep it actually has to enter into the skin. When you're aging, you're showing signs of like wrinkling and like structure effects on the skin. The skin structure is just not there. It sags and everything like that. And that's deeper in the skin. And so UVA penetrates deeper. As I mentioned, it's a little less energetic. UVB is a little more skin deep. It's a little more just top layers of skin, but it can do a lot more damage. And skin damage is related to kind of the intensity, the depth of where the damage is, and time. Skin damage doesn't happen all at once. It can happen over quite a long period of time or a short period of time.
So we all had our fair share of sun-soaked summers and glorious tans, but no sunburns. So are we still at risk?
See, the problem with photo damage is that it's not all visible. So sure, we know when we get sunburn, right? It's very visible, very obviously it's painful. And you can say like, it's just a little sunburn. It's a worse sunburn. We can gauge sunburn pretty well. Like we have good sensors on that. Not all the photo damage done to your skin is going to be really visible to you. Especially, let's just say because photo damage can be over decades sometimes. And if it's cancer, you can't necessarily see melanoma. You can't really see deeper skin damage that might happen too, especially over time. So it's difficult to use a visual gauge to say, my skin looks good, I'm not damaged. It's not a good marker for actual photo damage. So yeah, long, glorious summers and tans. I'm sure it's kind of good. It helps. It's great to be out in the sun and everything. We've existed as humans and with the sun for a long time. But sometimes you should be concerned that too much sun is not necessarily a good thing. And so photo damage can be there without you even seeing it.
I'm telling you, I'm kind of terrified of the sun.
Don't be too freaked out. Don't be too freaked out. It's okay.
I wear a lot of sunscreen, but it's nice to understand why. I think we're all told to wear sunscreen. We just don't know the why. And this first part was a great learning for me on the different rays. I love that whole analogy of the high energy ray, which is like the UVB. It's going to do the most damage because it's the most hyped.
Right. But there's way more of the little stuff that doesn't do as much damage. And so in the end, you got to be concerned with all of them to some extent.
Exactly.
Right. It's the types of light that you're putting out, and you can't always see photo damage. So yeah.
Kelly, what did you learn today?
I feel like when we're talking a little bit about tans, that's where I definitely get a little more concerned because there's definitely been years when I was younger when I was obsessed with being tan. Like I remember going out on my parents' rooftop in like March, like to try to get a tan before prom and things like that. Like, so I think just being more aware now of, UVA, UVB, I'm definitely not doing those habits or those activities anymore. But I think just being aware of maybe a tan isn't so good.
It's not all doom and gloom. I will say that, right? You don't have to be totally scared of the sun, but awareness is the word of the day, I think here. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brian, for being with us today and sharing your expertise. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in, and stay sun protected and skin smart. And we'll see you on our next episode.